On this Monday night, back to school angst and assurances.
We have really done whatever we can to protect our kids.
The prediction that problems are coming.
I don't have a lot of confidence in many provincial governments.
India's dubious new distinction.
I don't think any living doctor has seen such a long pandemic ever.
Plus the offside behavior by players from England's soccer team. California's dangerous infernos.
We grabbed everything that we can.
What's fanning the flames and the weather whiplash on the way.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. It's a big week for Canadian students with the bulk going back to school. This year's list of school supplies includes a mask, and the final touches are being put on classrooms to make them as safe as possible in a pandemic. But there is growing anxiety about how it will all unfold. Nobody knows if classrooms will actually be a return to normal or if they'll promote the spread of COVID-19. But as Ross Lord reports in our top story tonight, we do know it'll be a huge adjustment with the potential for even more disruption.
For many Canadians, back-to-school shopping includes a search for reassurance.
Everybody's trying to make the best of it.
But fear of the unknown is lurking.
Yeah, concerned about another breakout for sure. Yeah, and then concerned that kids will all be home, concerned about what's that going to do for people working. Yeah, really worried about that.
I'm interested to see how everybody's gonna work with having to be socially distanced while we're learning and paying attention to other things other than coronavirus.
Leaders offer reassurances classes can resume safely with an emphasis on masks and distancing where possible.
We have really done whatever we can to protect our kids, but it's time to get back and move on with COVID.
But does moving on with COVID in the same classrooms as before mean exposing students and school staff to the virus?
I have 22 kids in my room. I have them about 60 centimeters apart. So that's significantly less than we know or we've been told is safe.
Carrie Vino suggests teachers in Nova Scotia are receiving mixed messages.
I have one teacher who thinks that their children don't ever have to wear masks, and another teacher who thinks, no, they do have to wear masks in the hallways.
There's early evidence from Quebec. Classes there have already resumed. 47 schools have reported COVID-19 cases. So far, there's no indication the virus is spreading within schools. But for the weeks and months ahead, some disease researchers anticipate disruptions.
I actually expect there to be some school closures somewhere in the country before this semester is out, because I don't have a lot of confidence in many provincial governments' commitment to what needs to be done.
Not to mention the pressure on Canadian students, teachers, and families to practice enough self-control to prevent caseloads from climbing. Ross Lord, Global News, Windsor, Nova Scotia.
Caseloads are climbing in Quebec. For the second straight day, the province has recorded more than 200 new infections. East of Montreal, 2 bars owned by the same person are suspected to have violated public health guidelines. Police say they had to intervene over the weekend at both places. At one of them, police allege patrons weren't following physical distancing rules, dancing too closely, and some not wearing masks. The owner, who says he's doing everything he can to ensure regulations are respected, could face a fine. On the global scale, there are now more than 27 million cases of COVID-19 worldwide. Today, India overtook Brazil as the country with the second highest number of confirmed infections. More than 4 million people in that country have become sick with the virus. Signs of a second wave are emerging in several European countries. In the UK, the government is placing the blame squarely on younger people who aren't following the rules. And as Redmond Shannon reports, a scandal with England's national soccer team suggests politicians might have a point.
India's metro trains are back on track after a 6-month shutdown. The government is trying to restart the economy, which shrank by an enormous 24% in the last quarter. But this reopening is happening as the number of new cases gets higher every day. In fact, the curve has been rising steadily since April.
When it started, we did not think it would last so long, and because I don't think any living doctor has seen such a long pandemic ever.
India, home to 1.3 billion people, has passed Brazil as the country with the second highest number of infections behind the US.
Some of our staffs are also getting affected with COVID because of physical exertion and not being able to take care of themselves.
Notably, India's death rate per capita is much lower than the US or Brazil. Experts are unsure why. A young population, inaccurate death data, and exposure to previous viruses could be some of the reasons. A grim landmark in Spain on Monday too. More than 500,000 people there have now tested positive. This woman complains that Spain has been allowing in tourists without any testing. Many of those travellers come from the UK, which is seeing a similar second wave, but also without a major spike in deaths.
The rise in the number of cases we've seen over the last few days is largely amongst younger people. Inevitably, it leads to older people catching it from them.
Young people are getting the blame, and it doesn't help that 2 young players on the England soccer team were thrown out of camp for reportedly breaking guidelines by meeting 2 women.
Obviously, they've been naive. We've dealt with it appropriately. There's responsibility on every age group to make sure that they play their part in keeping each other safe.
But in more encouraging news, Russia says the final phase 3 trials of its potentially promising Sputnik 5 vaccine will begin as early as this week. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
There's a dire warning tonight from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Yves Giroux says the federal government's deficit spending is unsustainable unless it's reined in. But there are signs the purse strings aren't being tightened. The Liberal government has been hinting at an ambitious plan to be revealed in the throne speech at the end of the month. Mike Lecouture is in Ottawa and joins us with the details. Mike, what's the timeline on that?
Well, Robin, the message from the Parliamentary Budget Officer is clear. He says the Liberals have to change course within the next 12 to 24 months, or else.
Either raise taxes or reduce other areas of spending.
Canada's Parliamentary Budget Officer Yves Giroux made the comments in an interview on the West Block with Mercedes Stephenson. While he supports the economic stimulus measures to counter COVID-19, he says something has to give.
Without a doubt that we cannot afford deficits of over $300 billion for more than just a few years. And when I say a few years, I really mean a year or 2. Beyond that, it would become unsustainable.
The PBO's biggest concern is the lack of a plan from the federal government to balance the budget.
Trudeau and the people around him are living in a fantasy land where they believe they can fund the government by borrowing hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars to fund a bunch of vanity projects that don't help Canadians.
The NDP believes the best way to get back to balance is to go after the wealthy.
That means eliminating offshore tax havens, putting in place a wealth tax, making sure that the massive profits that the web giants earn is actually subject to taxation.
When the Liberals presented their fiscal snapshot in July, there was no indication of a plan for the years ahead. However, the Prime Minister has hinted at an ambitious plan for a new direction after he hit the reset button by proroguing Parliament.
As we move forward in reimagining what the Canadian economy can look like in the coming years, we have an opportunity to go greener. We have an opportunity to be fairer, to reduce barriers for women's participation, for Indigenous participation in the workforce.
The Prime Minister has also signaled he wants to close the gaps for racialized and marginalized Canadians. Expect that to be in the throne speech as well. And while opposition parties have complained they've yet to be consulted on the content of the speech, as is the custom, a senior government source tells Global News all parties will be part of the process before it's presented to Canadians on September 23rd. Robin?
Mike, you reached out to the office of the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister. Any comments on what the PBO had to say?
Well, not directly, but Chrystia Freeland did say in a statement, we are contending with a historic worldwide economic slowdown, one for which Canada was well prepared due to our strong fiscal position relative to those of our G7 peers, end quote. Now, that all may be true, but the PBO still wants to see their plan for the way forward. Robin?
Mike Lecouture in Ottawa. Thanks, Mike. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is out of a medically induced coma. Doctors treating him in Germany say his condition is improving after being poisoned by the chemical nerve agent Novichok. The outspoken critic of Russian President Vladimir Putin became sick during a flight to Moscow on August 20th. Russian doctors who initially treated him deny there was poison in his system. Navalny was transferred to this hospital in Berlin. He's able to understand people talking to him and is being weaned off a ventilator. A leading opposition leader in Belarus has reportedly been kidnapped. Witnesses say masked men pulled Maria Kolesnikova into a minivan while she was walking in the capital. Her abduction is the latest in a series of disappearances apparently engineered by Belarus security agencies in the aftermath of the disputed election, which has sparked mass protests. Yesterday, more than 100,000 people marched on the president's residence calling for his resignation. Nearly 700 were arrested. Alexander Lukashenko has led the country for 26 years and is rejecting calls for a new election. He's been pressuring opponents to flee and then accuses them of working with Western nations to undermine Belarus. The Eastern European nation is often described as Europe's last dictatorship. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange was in a London court today for an extradition hearing long delayed by the pandemic. Assange, who has spent almost a year and a half in a British prison, formally refused the U.S. extradition request. American prosecutors have indicted the 49-year-old on 18 espionage and computer misuse charges. They pertain to a publication of secret U.S. military documents a decade ago. The charges carry a maximum sentence of 175 years in prison.
Julian is a publisher, a publication is WikiLeaks, and a journalist. It's an oppression of journalism and free press everywhere in the Western world. It can't go on. It has to stop now.
Dozens of supporters gathered outside the courthouse, calling his prosecution a threat to freedom of the press. Assange spent 7 years holed up in Ecuador's embassy in London. He fathered 2 children with his partner while inside. He was dragged out over a year ago after Ecuador revoked his asylum. He remains jailed pending the outcome of the U.S. extradition request. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have repaid the cost of refurbishing Frogmore Cottage near Windsor Castle. A spokesperson for Prince Harry and his wife Meghan say they have paid the bill in full. The renovation, estimated at more than £2 million, was covered by taxpayers, sparking widespread criticism. The Duke and Duchess promised to repay it when they stepped back from royal duties. The property will remain a UK residence for Harry and his family. Californians in the danger zone. Coming up, what some people were forced to do to escape catastrophic wildfires. Plus, deadly typhoon, the Korean peninsula gets pummeled. And later... Get out! Get out! No kidding when goading a goat takes too much effort. Parts of California are under a state of emergency tonight as wildfires rage across the state. More than 14,000 firefighters are battling 23 major fires. The flames have burned more than 600,000 hectares of land. More than 3,000 structures have been destroyed and 8 people have been killed. So far, firefighters have been unable to contain the flames as temperatures soar to record-breaking levels. As Jackson Prosco reports, that's not the only record.
There's never been a fire season this bad in California, with more forest burned than in any year on record, and it's only September.
We grabbed everything that we can. This is our first experience.
The long weekend brought frantic departures.
My biggest fear is just hopefully my house doesn't burn down.
And harrowing rescues. Campers and hikers were trapped at a lake Sunday after the only road out was suddenly cut off by flames. More than 200 people had to be rescued by helicopter. Some took shelter in the lake until they could be whisked to safety.
At some point during the day, when they became trapped, they were doing what they could to rescue themselves and make themselves safe, some of which resulted in injuries.
Across California, conditions are so tinder dry that the rapidly growing El Dorado fire is out of control after being accidentally sparked by a smoking pyrotechnic device at a gender reveal party. Extreme weather is fueling this fiery nightmare. Temperatures in the San Fernando Valley reached an unbearable 49 degrees Celsius on Sunday.
It's definitely hotter than I thought it was going to be this weekend, so definitely just trying to stay cool today.
5 million households face the threat of rolling blackouts as utilities struggle to keep up with demand. Extreme winds will only add fuel to the fires. Warnings extend up and down the Pacific coast and as far inland as Colorado, where they're preparing for weather whiplash as a high-pressure system moves in from Alberta, turning extreme heat into an early season snowstorm.
You just aren't necessarily expecting this much cold. You kind of wish those Canadians would keep it to themselves, but they're not.
Back in California, moisture in any form would be welcome right about now. A break in the heat this week could help firefighters gain the upper hand. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
The U.S. Navy is desperately searching for a sailor who has gone missing from the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz in the northern Arabian Sea. The crew reported a man overboard Sunday after an exhausting search of the vessel, which is America's oldest carrier in active service. The Air Force is also involved in the search along with USS Princeton. The missing sailor has not been publicly identified. Nimitz has been operating just outside the Persian Gulf since late July because of U.S. tensions with Iran. Still ahead, do police in Hong Kong make a mistake in arresting a 12-year-old girl? Mudslides and floods have wreaked havoc in South Korea as Typhoon Haishan slammed the Korean peninsula. At least 2 people are dead and 2 others are missing. Along with heavy rain, the storm packed winds of over 120 kilometers per hour, leaving thousands without power. The storm comes just days after the country's endured similar chaos from Typhoon Maisak. Hong Kong police are being criticized over the rough arrest of a 12-year-old girl who got swept up in a protest while out buying art supplies. Video shows the officers trying to corral a group of people. The young girl attempted to run away. An officer tackled her to the ground while several others helped pin her down. The arrest happened yesterday during protests against a government decision to postpone legislative elections by a year. Nearly 300 people were arrested. Almost 300 Rohingya refugees have been found on a beach in Indonesia after spending 6 months at sea. Fishermen spotted the group making the journey in a wooden boat. The police say they left Bangladesh in March and set sail for Malaysia, but were turned away because of pandemic concerns. For years, the Rohingya have been fleeing persecution in Myanmar. Many are living in refugee camps in Bangladesh. Canada is joining an international genocide lawsuit against Myanmar. More than 850,000 Rohingya Muslims have fled the country. Thousands have been killed or have had their villages burned down by Myanmar security forces accused of ethnic cleansing.
Get out! Go! Get out! Go! Come on.
It took a lot of shooing to get this goat out of a police cruiser in Georgia. Body cam footage from the officer shows the goat jumped in as soon as she got out to serve papers. At one point, the deputy sheriff was knocked to the ground.
Get out! Get out!
It did get physical, but the goat eventually did get out. It ended up eating some of her important paperwork. The officer says she often leaves her car doors open because she's had to retreat from vicious dogs when conducting police business. And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is Cultus Lake, BC. We'd love to see your corner of this country, so send your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thank you for sharing your long weekend with us. Donna Friesen will be back here tomorrow. Have a great night.